Well, one of the big concerns about Omicron now, just when you thought that Omicron was going away from the world, certainly going away from large parts of India, is news of a new subvariant of Omicron. What exactly does this mean? Is it a very major threat? Joining us now, Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, Chief Scientist at the World Health Organization. Thanks, ma'am, very much for being with us. As usual, lots of questions which people have. And so therefore, let me ask you, first up, will the new Omicron subvariant mean another COVID wave?
Hello, Vishnu. Nice to talk to you again. And yes, about this new subvariant, if you remember, when we had the Delta variant classified as variant of concern, we also had several sublineages, and people were calling them different names at that time, Delta plus and so on. So whenever there is the virus evolves, and it develops mutations, and it's different enough to be, form a separate lineage, like the Omicron, which is a very different lineage. The viruses continue to keep evolving, and so within Omicron, you do see patterns, different patterns. And from the beginning, we had recognized that the Omicron variant had BA1, BA2, and BA3, and BA1 was predominant at the beginning and still continues to be globally predominant. And BA3, there's very little. But BA2, BA 1.2, which is what we're talking about now, the subvariant, is increasing in some countries. There are about 30 countries that are reporting increasing rates, and particularly India and Denmark, but also the UK and South Africa. BA2 seems to be actually getting an edge over BA1 and almost replacing BA1. It is different in terms of some of the mutations that it has, and it does seem to have a slight growth advantage, because in order to replace something, the new variant needs to have a slight growth advantage. And so it's been estimated that it has a 50 or 100% growth advantage over the BA1.
Right.
But in terms of clinical severity,
because it links, what you're saying links into my next question. Is the new Omicron subvariant therefore more dangerous?
So when we call something more dangerous or less dangerous, let's try to see what exactly are we talking about. One aspect, of course, is transmissibility, that we are concerned if something is very transmissible, like Omicron, then it spreads very quickly through the population. Now, the other aspect is clinical severity. Does it cause more severe disease? And luckily, in the case of Omicron, analyzing data from many countries, now it appears that Omicron causes less severe disease in the majority of people, and it has resulted in fewer hospitalizations, fewer critical care beds being occupied, and in fewer deaths. And there's a very extensive analysis in South Africa comparing their Delta wave and Omicron wave, which shows that the case fatality rate of hospitalized patients is about half during the Omicron wave. Now, so that's the other aspect. And the third aspect we're interested in is it able to evade our immune responses that we have thanks to our vaccines or thanks to previous infection? So I think what we know about BA2 is that it does seem to have an advantage in terms of improved transmissibility. That's why it seems to be replacing the BA1, but it doesn't seem to, so far, cause more severe disease or have any other major differences in properties. The one change, of course, is that it doesn't have that mutation that enabled BA1 to be picked up on regular PCR, the S gene target failure. It doesn't have that, and therefore S gene target failure can no longer be used as a proxy for the Omicron variant once it's moved to the BA2 variant, subvariant.
Ma'am, this is a really important point. Are you basically suggesting that it's a lot more difficult to sample BA2, this new subvariant?
The only way is through sequencing. We no longer have a surrogate that we had with the BA1, which could be picked up on regular PCR.
Right. Can you be infected with the Omicron subvariant after being infected by Omicron?
That's a very good question, and that's something that we need to be looking at. We are closely looking at the data on reinfections. I think it's too early really to say, and it's probably unlikely that would be happening to a large extent. Both of them, of course, have the properties of immune evasion, so they are able to reinfect previously infected or vaccinated people much more than previous variants could. But between BA1 and BA2, I don't think we see any significant, we cannot comment on the capacity to reinfect at this point.
Are you seeing, ma'am, reinfections in Omicron cases at all, or are the antibodies which people get on the basis of having been infected with Omicron, does it sustain for some period of time?
So from past experience, we know that the antibodies that you develop will sustain for a period of time, in fact, up to a year or so. And the fact is many people have also received vaccines either before or after they've been infected. So what we call hybrid immunity is considered to be the strongest type of immunity, should be longer lasting as well. It's too short a time. As you remember, Vishnu, we only labeled Omicron as a variant of concern on November 26th of 2021. So it's just been over 2 months, probably too early to have a lot of data on reinfection and in fact on long-lasting immunity. There is some data suggesting that people who've recovered from Omicron, if you take their blood, then it's able to neutralize previous variants, including Delta.
Right.
Which is good, but we don't know whether the same will be true for future variants.
Right.
And that's why we still need to be cautious and continue surveillance, continue monitoring, and continue to be prepared to deal with newer variants that are quite likely to come up, frankly.
In fact, we'll talk about that. But first, the vaccines, do they work against the Omicron subvariant?
I think we need to be very clear on that, because there's some confusion about this. Now, what the early studies showed, which were all lab-based studies, neutralizing antibody levels, showed that the Omicron variant was much less able to be neutralized by antibodies compared to the Delta, and Delta was already less compared to the original strain. This created, of course, a huge amount of concern. However, what is really important is the clinical studies, the clinical effectiveness studies, where you see how many people are getting infected, how many are getting hospitalized, and how many are dying. And when you look at that, then it turns out that the vaccines that we're using are still very good at protecting people against getting severe disease. And I think we're beginning to understand why, and that's because it's not only antibodies that are important in your immune system. We have a whole other part of the immune system, the T cell responses, the cell-mediated immunity, which plays a very important role in preventing you from getting sick. So the good news is that the vaccines are working very well. In fact, almost all the vaccines that have been approved by WHO continue to work well. Where they fall a bit short is in preventing infection. And as you know, we've seen a large number of breakthrough infections in people who have been vaccinated, and even those who've received a booster. Yeah. But most of the time, those infections pass off as being mild. And this is particularly true for the elderly, the most vulnerable. Sure. They have been well protected now by vaccines. And that really gives us a lot of hope that our vaccines are going to be protective. But we still need to develop better vaccines, more broadly protective, looking ahead again, to see if we can protect against all coronaviruses. But right now, I think there's no need to be concerned about the existing vaccines.
Is it likely that COVID will keep mutating?
Yes, absolutely. And we've known that from the beginning. And we've said from the beginning it will keep mutating. It's a property of viruses, RNA viruses, to mutate.
Will there ever be a vaccine that can handle multiple mutations? In other words, sort of the magic vaccine, one that effectively kills off COVID in all its avatars, or deals with it, or protects us from infection in the first place?
That's the holy grail. And in fact, people who've been working on influenza vaccines have also been searching for universal influenza vaccine. As you know, the flu vaccines get modified every year based on circulating strains. Ideally, you'd like a flu vaccine that protects for long and protects against all variants. Similarly, what we call a pan-coronavirus vaccine or a pan-sarbecovirus vaccine, that's what would be very good to have. There's a huge amount of R&D going on this topic. In fact, the WHO had a big convening last week where we brought together all the world scientists to discuss a path to develop a pan-coronavirus vaccine. In the intermediate stage, we could adopt strategies like heterologous, like mix and match. There are intranasal vaccines that are being developed, which might serve well to have local immunity, mucosal immunity. So there are multiple approaches. But I think that scientifically it's very plausible and possible to develop a pan-coronavirus vaccine which will protect, very broadly, and that would be ideal.
All right, ma'am. Lovely speaking to you. Thank you so much for taking those questions, on this new subvariant. We just have to be careful, don't we, and keep masking up. Thank you, ma'am, very much for being with us. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.